recording as well. Amazing. Can you guys drop your LinkedIn's in the group chat? I get to connect with each other. Yes, you're here to learn about Daniella, but all of you guys are here to learn about tech and data. So you might as well network with each other. I'll start up first by dropping my LinkedIn. But yeah, we're just gonna wait until like more people are here and then we can get started. Guys, don't be shy. I want to see you guys in the comments. Introduce yourself, your name. Almost on point. I love this, Iris. Appreciate this. Guys, I don't want to be talking to blocks on black screens. I want to see people, okay? Amazing. People are dropping their LinkedIn in the group in the chat already. That's amazing.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, good evening, good evening. Good evening. Nice to meet you. Guys, there's 14, no? 14, 12 of us in here, guys. 14 of us in here, including me and Daniela. But guys, I need your LinkedIn's. There's only 3, 4. More people are coming in. We're gonna start soon. Amazing. Another screen. I love this for us. I love this for us, guys. As well as turning your screen, guys, I want to see LinkedIn's in the group chat. I need to connect with each other and get to know each other. You might not know. Somebody might be working on an interesting project that you might be interested in. So you just never can know what's happening in these rooms. Danielle, am I right?
Absolutely, definitely all right. I will introduce myself properly, guys. By the way, I'm just waiting to like 5:05 so I don't repeat myself.
Amazing. Yes. 2 more minutes. We're gonna wait for people. Minute, and then we're gonna start. Let's drop your LinkedIn's in the chat, okay? So you guys can connect with each other and get to know each other a bit more. And then we're about to start. Good evening, everyone. My name is Demilade. I am Community and Marketing Lead here at Beyond Education. And today I'll be your host for the All Things Tech and Data with Daniella. We have amazing panel here today. Daniela is an award-winning data analyst, so she has all the tips, all the tricks, all the gems to give to you guys. And it's just another 55 minutes of you guys learning more about her journey and asking your questions and everything you need to know to get into tech. So I will hand over to Daniela and we can get started.
Hi guys. So yeah, as Demi said, I'm Daniela. I'm a data analyst, well, soon to be now data projects manager, which I'll explain in a couple of minutes because I know people might be confused by that terminology, as I am as well. But yes, as Demi said, I'm a data analyst, to put it quite simply, and I successfully career switched from pursuing law to going into data analytics. So I guess I can start by talking about what data analytics actually is, for those of you that aren't too sure on what it is. The best way I can describe it is that it's about turning raw data. So anything can be considered data. Your personal information, for example, can be considered data. The amount of sales a company does can be considered data. The way a company might budget can be considered data. The amount of products or the type of products that a company sells might be considered data. What I'm basically trying to say here is that data is truly all around us. And data analytics is, I guess, the principle or realm of transforming that raw data into actionable insights. And again, what does that mean? It's a way of being able to tell a story, essentially, with data, being able to say, oh, these are the patterns and trends that we can spot as a result of analyzing said data. So I guess another question that I wanted to quickly answer before I even get it is, why data analytics, or why should you consider a career in data analytics, or even the space of data? It's a very big question, and it definitely depends on your needs. Um, I know that when I was switching to data, I chose to go into data analytics because it aligned the most with what I was doing or what I wanted to do, not in a legal sense, but more so in terms of my genuine interest outside of my professional work. So, for example, I had my platform on TikTok way before I switched into data, but I was obsessed with numbers. I was obsessed with tracking my views, my engagement, my reach. And I kind of already knew I was like numeric savvy in that way. And I would always track my insights as a way of improving the quality of my videos, improving the performance of my content. So I always knew like I genuinely had an interest in data as opposed to something like, let's say, software engineering or cybersecurity. So, like I said, it really does depend on your personal needs, personal wants. But I guess going back to the question of why data analytics and why it matters, well, it's useful in every and any industry. In the 2 years that I've worked as a data analyst, I've worked in several different industries, and I will talk more about my job hopping and all the different industries that I've worked in. But I just wanted to quickly explain that. Now, I know I'm strictly talking about data analytics, but it's of course important not to neglect other areas of data. And I want to bring a specific role to your doorsteps that you guys might not have heard of as well. But let's actually talk about the different roles within data. So we know we've got data engineers, we've got data analysts, and we've got data scientists. The most annoying question that I get asked when I'm on live a lot is, well, what is the difference between these three roles, right? I guess you can think about it in a life cycle sense. So when you're looking at the life cycle of a specific element, feature, or product, you're basically looking at the end-to-end process of that feature. So let's talk about data. At the very beginning, we have data engineers. They're responsible for building databases, building tables. They're basically trying to sort data, which is essentially in a data lake, which, by the way, is an actual terminology that is used. And they've got data that might be structured or unstructured. An unstructured piece of data could be maybe images spread across a Word document. That's an example of an unstructured piece of data. A more so structured piece of data might be a data set in Excel. So you've got rows, you've got columns that has more structure to it. Their job is to bring all these various different data sources together and put it in a database, create schemas for it, create tables, etc. I'm not going to dive too much into the nitty gritty of it, but their job is to maintain those databases, build on those databases, and just work on making sure that the data sources are alive and well. So if data engineers are at the start, data analysts are in the middle. So we take the data that data engineers have essentially created or sorted out, and we query data. So we might be interested to know how product sales for a particular brand is performing. Let's say I was working for, I don't know, maybe ASOS, and ASOS sells a number of different brands. If I wanted to see how, for example, Adidas is performing, I would query the data or query the database in this case using SQL for the most part. This is where SQL kind of plays a role. Of course, it depends on where data lives in a company. Companies have different ways of storing data, but I might query that data and be like, hey, give me the performance of product sales for Adidas over the past 6 months for shoes specifically. So when you're essentially writing a query, you're telling the database what specific pieces of data you want, and you're essentially turning that into actionable insights. Data analysts deal with readily available present data in that sense. So if you can imagine, if data engineers are at the very beginning and then data analysts are in the middle, then ding, 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 data scientists will of course be focused on the feature. They're also concerned with predictive analytics. They're concerned with, okay, so we've got all this data. How can we shape the future processes of the company, or how can we shape the future of the company as a whole with the data that we have? And that's where you learn, where you hear terminologies like machine learning, which is a subset of AI. That's where you hear data scientists building all of these cool models, training them and deploying them. They're really just focused on trying to use a number of different mathematical concepts in order to kind of see what we can do with the data in terms of the future and in terms of how we can automate as well some of the processes that we have. Automation is not necessarily strictly a data scientist's role, but it can play a part in what they do. So yeah, I just thought to kind of give you guys a breakdown of the differences because, like I said, that is a question that I get asked a lot. So in terms of the common tools and softwares that you might come across, you'll definitely come across SQL, as I mentioned. Data engineers use SQL to build databases. They might also use dbt, which is a Python package, which helps in creating databases and views. And it's also used by analytical engineers. I should have mentioned them. Now, I want you guys to be very well aware of this new role that we can see emerging more and more in the data space. So analytical engineers, I guess their job title kind of gives it away. So analytical engineers, they're hybrid. They are analysts and engineers in one. And you might be thinking, why do we have this? Well, think of a big company like, let's say, Mercedes, right? Mercedes might have data engineers and they might have data analysts. The problem is, and this is something that I have faced in previous roles, is that data analysts and engineers, sometimes they sit on separate teams or like in separate divisions. And a lot of the times when it comes to like the regulatory framework behind data and, databases, a lot of data engineers hold the principal say on things. Now, what this means for data analysts is we constantly have to rely on data engineers for databases. If there's an issue with a database, we go to them. If there's a schema that we don't have access to, we go to them. But companies have been realizing that more and more there is a problem of efficiency when you have this type of relationship in place. So that's why analytical engineers are becoming more prominent, and they're like a newly shaped role. That's the best way you can think of it. And they're basically hybrid roles. Analytical engineers tend to use dbt, which was the technology I was just talking about, because dbt basically streamlines the process of having to create databases and create tables. So for example, if I'm working on something and I only want a temporary table, like I don't really want a table that already exists, I might use dbt to create like a mini version or like a pilot version of that table in order to carry out my work. So that's what analytical engineers kind of exist for. So yeah, those are the roles that I wanted to cover. Back to the technologies, of course, SQL, of course, dbt, Python as well. Python is used for automation purposes, and Python is also used for machine learning purposes. And it definitely has a number of different libraries and packages that are useful that a lot of analysts might use as well. So what does it take to actually be a data analyst? Curiosity. That's like the number one important thing you need to realize in this type of career. Every single job interview I have had, when I ask about what the successful traits are for somebody in this position, in this role, 9 times out of 10, the hiring manager will respond to me and say curiosity. Curiosity feels change, it feels problem solving, it feels critical thinking and attention to detail. You have to be curious as a data analyst. You have to be willing to uncover things, willing to uncover insights. Remember, in this new day and age of AI and how we're seeing emerging technologies, it's so critical and important to be future facing, to be forward thinking in that sense. And curiosity tends to drive that a lot. Taking initiative is so important. I definitely think the second most important skill is communication, and better yet, being able to digest data or make data digestible to different stakeholders. I work with so many different stakeholders, and majority of the time I've worked with a lot of non-technical stakeholders. So people who are just there to do their own work and might not have the idea of what I'm talking about 99% of the time, because I tend to use a lot of jargon. But it's so important as a data analyst or data engineer, data scientist, whatever the case may be, that you're able to make data digestible. You're able to translate data, essentially. You're able to talk about what all of these technical concepts mean and relate it back to their work and talk about how these insights impact their work. So communication is definitely important. You're supposed to know how to work with people as well, and you're supposed to have that soft skill in terms of being adaptable as well. Adaptability is crucial because when you're working in a fast-paced environment, things change all the time. When I was working at an aviation company, things changed all the time because new services were being brought on, new bits of data were being looked at. So I could be working on a project one day and that project could be dropped even the next day and I'm doing something else entirely. So being in a fast-paced environment is so important, especially when companies have a lot of services and products that they offer. Their sales are constantly increasing. They need somebody to watch the numbers in that sense. So as a data analyst, you've got to be quick on your feet. You've got to know how to be adaptable to situations. So I guess that's definitely crucial. And I guess in terms of where you can get started, there's loads of different places you can get started. I did a boot camp. So going back to my journey, I did a boot camp with an organization called Code First Girls. It was a 13-week boot camp at the time, and it basically enabled me to learn about the world of data. I learned how to code in SQL and Python, use Tableau. We covered a lot of machine learning concepts as well. So it was really a crucial course, especially in consolidating all my knowledge on data analytics. And then within a month of graduating from that course, I was able to land my first job as a junior data analyst. And that's where my projects and portfolio really helped as well. Like, out of all courses that you do, your projects, your portfolio, and how you showcase your skills matter the most. So being able to showcase that I know how to code in SQL, I know how to code in Python, I know how to build a chatbot, for example, or I know how to analyze data in relation to the Olympics, which is a project that I did do, was paramount in me landing my first role as a data analyst, because anybody can do a tech course, anyone can do a boot camp. Now, of course, this is not the only way. Of course, courtesy of HSBC, we have wonderful internships that you can do, especially for those of you that are at uni. I would say to take full advantage of those because that can be a huge stepping stone. I feel as though a lot of companies who have interns tend to go back to work full time with said companies. So definitely look into doing internships. Of course, you've got grad schemes as well, and you've got apprenticeships. You've got various different ways in this day and age of breaking into tech and getting into data roles, courtesy of the various different providers that we have. HSBC, like I said, being one as well. And I definitely hope you guys are looking into it. So definitely consider your options. Some of these options are more flexible than others. Some of them are more long-term commitment than others. So I guess it really does range. So I guess that's a little about data analytics, me, and the different roles within data analytics. I guess I'll stop there because I feel like I'm talking a lot.
Oh, amazing, amazing. That was very, very, very insightful. I was even typing on the chat as well. I was getting gems, communication, adaptability, analytical, like so many tips and tricks that people can actually start implementing today to get themselves into the positions that they're in. So now we're gonna start with some Q&A. If you guys have any questions, you can drop them in the group chat now. But I will start off with the ones that I already have. So, number one. I know you talked about some skills, technical skills, soft skills, but what are the essential technical skills that you think as a data analyst to have, and how do you recommend building them? I know we talked about internships, boot camps and stuff, but if you don't have an internship or don't have a boot camp, how can you kind of like get started in any way, shape, or form?
Yes, of course. There's a lot of people who are self taught, and to a degree, I've been self taught with some of the skills that I've acquired throughout my journey. One skill that I recommend everybody to focus on first and foremost is Excel. Excel is a traditional tool, but it forms the foundation of a lot of the things that you learn as a data analyst, especially in relation to aggregating data, creating pivot tables, and most importantly, cleaning data. A lot of companies have dirty data. That is literally a terminology that they use as well. Data that is unclean, data that has missing values, that's inconsistent, that has duplicate values. Using Excel in order to clean this data is a great skill to have. I feel so even in relation to the type of analytics you can perform, whether it's descriptive or statistical analytics, Excel is really useful for that. And I always recommend you to learn Excel because a lot of the things that you learn in Excel, kind of when you start writing SQL queries, you realize it's a lot easier for you to do so because you'll realize this is something you've already done in Excel, but you'll just kind of, instead of creating or writing formulas, shall I say, or creating pivot tables, you're writing queries to get the same data out. So Excel is the first tool that I would learn, and I would use W3 schools. They're really useful for not just Excel, but for SQL and Python. If you go to w3schools.com, you can kind of learn SQL and learn Excel and learn it off the back of, off the back of a curriculum, or better yet, use ChatGPT as well. Like you can literally input a prompt and just be like, oh, I want to learn Python, or I want to learn SQL or Excel, and ChatGPT can give you a personalized curriculum. So I always recommend people to do that. And then in relation to visualization tools, so visualization tools are ways of creating visuals off of reports, so charts, graphs, and they're interactive usually. So an example of a visualization tool would be a dashboard, but the specific platform you might use to build that dashboard, it could be Power BI and it could be Tableau as well. I always get asked which one to learn first. Power BI is the more difficult one, but they both serve different purposes. So whilst they're both visualization tools, I think the key difference is the type of company. So a lot of B2C companies, so business to clients or business to customers companies, they'll tend to use Tableau. The reason being, Tableau is a product owned by Salesforce, and Salesforce is a tool a lot of companies use. Salesforce owns Tableau, and they also have their own visualization tool called CRM Analytics, which is embedded within Salesforce, and I've used it before. But actually, Salesforce recently announced a year ago that they were going to merge the two together, so Tableau and CRM Analytics. So we are going to be seeing more changes in Tableau as a result of kind of bridging these two visualization tools together. But it's definitely important to learn Tableau. But I would say Power BI is more in demand to an extent again. And I only say this because I've been interviewing recently, and a lot of companies have asked me about my Power BI knowledge a lot more than my Tableau knowledge. And I guess because obviously Power BI is part of the Power applications within Microsoft, and it works well with other applications, and it's more robust. You can perform a lot more manipulation and there's a lot more capabilities within Power BI, and it has its own querying language called DAX as well, which a lot of companies will probably ask you about if you interview with them about your knowledge with DAX. So I think Power BI is really useful. And of course, it doesn't just apply to B2C companies, it can apply to B2B companies as well. That's not to say Tableau doesn't, but as you can imagine, because Tableau is owned by Salesforce and Salesforce is a client relationship management tool, a lot of companies will use Salesforce and in regards to that Tableau, or therefore Tableau. So I would say learn both. I would learn Tableau first, or if you like a challenge, learn Power BI first. But I would learn Tableau first just to kind of get it out of the way, and then learn Power BI. And then, of course, Python. Python is more or less a useful tool for also cleaning data, but also for automation purposes, as I said earlier on, and machine learning purposes. Those of you who are interested in the more data science side of things, Python is very, very important to learn, and most of the time crucial to learn. And Python can be learned through W3 schools. You can also use a range of resources such as Free Code Camp, Code Academy. You can take some Coursera courses, even a YouTube playlist. But I guess no matter what sort of skill you learn, it's just so important that you actually showcase these skills. I'd say to work on your skills in increments. So maybe focus 1 month on SQL, 1 month on Python, 1 month on Tableau, and so on and so forth, and constantly build your knowledge as you go along. But I'd say those are the core skills. So I guess the very first being Excel, and then the very last I would say being Python. As Python is it's useful to have, but it's not core for a lot of data analyst roles, thankfully.
Amazing, amazing. Just going off your explanation of that question, two things came into mind. Number one, you said initiative to be a self-starter. How important do you think that is as data analyst in terms of like just getting started and doing your own projects? That's number one. And number two, you mentioned being able to like review CVs and stuff. A question that was brought up by registrants were like, how do you get started with the tell me about yourself question on the application?
Okay. Well, I guess I'll answer the very first question first about being a self-starter and taking initiative. When you go into a company, you'll get shown their legacy systems, you'll get shown the reports that they have and the type of tech stack that they use as well. When I say being inquisitive, it's so important because by you asking questions, you're able to, of course, drive that curiosity and maybe come up with a process that might streamline the way a company is currently doing things, or you might come up with an idea. So when I was working at a media company and it was more of a junior role, one of the biggest challenges that the company had is that they didn't have a centralized, meaning one way of viewing all their sales, all their deals. It was kind of spread out across different platforms. So one of the projects that I took initiative on was creating a sales analytics dashboard. That dashboard was responsible for monitoring trading performance across the advertising floor and of course consolidating all those data sources. So it's really just about knowing the company's issues, knowing their problems, their challenges, and finding ways to action them. And I guess being able to be curious and inquisitive really helps in that regard. And that kind of fosters your ability to be creative and come up with solutions. So that's definitely my answer to that. And then in regards to the second question, sorry, what was the second part of the
The
question? I even
second
forgot.
question was about you reviewing CVs. So about the section in the interview when they're asking you, tell me about yourself. How would you start that process and give like a succinct answer to the interviewer in a sense?
Okay, so I narrate my journey. So I still remember the answer that I used to give when I was actually switching from law to tech. Funnily enough, considering I've got more experience now. And I always talked about my law degree. I think a lot of people are shy to talk about their non-technical backgrounds in technical interviews, but actually I think it's so important to showcase your willingness to upskill yourself and learn from the very beginning. So I used to give an answer in the realms of, oh, as you can tell from my CV, I studied law, but my interest in tech actually stemmed from my law degree, which it did, because in the final year of my law degree, I took a module called Law, Science and Technology Studies. And in that module, I wrote a paper on the best regulatory framework for machine learning. As I was writing that paper, I grew an interest in machine learning and started to learn about the data science side of data. And as I was learning, I decided to take a course. I always initially thought I was more of a literature type of person, but being able to take that course taught me that I have problem solving capabilities beyond my law degree. And then I started to, of course, do the boot camp. And then after completing the boot camp, I feel as though I'm now ready to apply all my skills in a professional capacity. That used to be the answer that I gave. So I feel as though you shouldn't shy away from talking about your non-technical experience. You shouldn't shy away from kind of leaning into some of the interesting and creative things you might have done. Because I talked about, of course, doing a project focused on analyzing the past 3 Olympics within my answer. So I'd say definitely craft your answer in a way where you're narrating your journey, your story so far, and don't be shy in mentioning your non-technical background or the non-technical things that you might have done, because actually a lot of companies nowadays, they want people from different backgrounds who have different ways of thinking, who have different ideas. Diversity and inclusion is something that the tech space lacks in general, and a lot of companies are trying to kind of close that bridge. So don't be shy in talking about your unconventional background.
Amazing, amazing. Now going back to the questions on the chat. First question, how do you approach a new data project from scratch? What is your process to do that?
So when I was working on projects, of course, I did one as part of a group when I was doing the Code First Girls CFG degree, which was the course that I did. But then when I started to do my own personal projects, I kind of took some of the principles that I learned during that course and applied it on how I was creating my own projects. So my very first thing is not to focus too much on the idea. Now, you're probably wondering why. When you become data analysts or go into the data field, you'll realize that a lot of the questions that stakeholders have or that you might have, they tend to form a lot later once you've actually dealt with the data. So, for example, I had an idea that I wanted to look at data to do with sales, to do with fashion specifically, but I had no idea the type of angle that I wanted to come from. I had no idea what I was doing. So I went to a resource called Kaggle, or a website called Kaggle, Kaggle. Very useful resource where you can access raw and open data. And I downloaded the data set. I looked through it. And of course, the very first thing you will be doing is cleaning data when you get started on the project. So I looked through it, cleaned the data, and then try to form questions or form ideas based off of the data that I was dealing with. So I was like, okay, I've never really explored the data science side of things. I know Python has a lot of amazing libraries. So what I want to do is split this data set into a training data set and a test data set. And I actually want to do some data modeling, but in a machine learning capacity. And I actually want to train this data set so it tells us the next piece of trending clothing based off of this data, so based off of historical data in that sense. So that idea really came around as I went along. Of course, there are different ways of navigating the data project. You might come up with the questions at the very start if you're smart enough to do so, or you might even rely more on focusing on the data engineering side of things. So focus on your ability to use SQL. But that's how I pretty much got started. Like for me personally, my ideas flow when I've seen the data. But of course, in a more professional capacity, most of the time you get set a project or you get set a task, and that's through requirements gathering as well. So you kind of are able to shape the direction of your projects. But of course, when you're learning and you're developing, you have more control. There's less control when you're actually a professional because things need to be done. There's, processes in place. But, some of the projects I've worked with in a professional capacity have also been creative. But I guess, yeah, that's how I would start. I've done a video on this on my TikTok, actually, where I talk about the end-to-end life cycle of creating a project and how I would approach it. But yeah, it really does depend, of course, on the project that you're dealing with. But that's how I would start.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that. Next question would be, what are some misconceptions about data analysis that you encounter and how do you address them?
Um, I think a lot of people think you have to be super duper technical. By super duper technical, I mean, I feel as though most of the time people ask me, like, how proficient do you need to be in Python? How proficient do you need to be in SQL? Now, when it comes to data, and working in a data analyst capacity, I can say that compared to what I thought I should have known, I don't really do as much as I would have thought. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. What I'm trying to say here is, for example, in regards to SQL, a lot of data analysts will say focus on SQL, and you should. But I always thought I would have to write the most complex queries. I'd have to come up with the most long-winded queries and write out superscripts. And that's not necessarily the case, because a lot of the times stakeholders that you're working with, they want something so simple, and you might have a complex way of getting to that simple thing, but actually, in generally speaking, it's not as complex as you might think. So the example that I gave earlier on of maybe looking at product sales for a specific brand for a specific time period, when you break down the task and you write out the SQL query, you realize it's what, probably like 10 lines long. You're selecting columns, you're aggregating them, you're saying, okay, so I want it where time period equals this, sum by, blah, 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 order by. So it's like when you actually write out the queries, you're like, oh, this isn't even that serious. I'd say the hardest bits is when you're automating data. It's when you're looking more into the data science side of things, or it's when you're building a dashboard as well. So you're having to merge different data sets. So I feel as though that's a very common misconception that I get, that you have to be Albert Einstein and you have to be super smart in that sense. And then yeah, I guess that's my answer in relation to that.
Thank you so much for that. We've touched on a little bit on you switching from law to data and analysis. What kind of how do you feel like in data analyst you're applying the skills you learned in law? Does that work? Does it is it functional? The skills you learned in law and applying that to the role you do now?
So I kind of talked earlier on about making data digestible and translating data, and I feel as though that skill stems from studying law, having to do critical thinking, having to read dozens of textbooks and having to read through cases and kind of pick the important parts of a case in the way I write out my answer. You could say that's the same principle I apply to how I query data and how I look at data as well. And better yet, my presentation skills have definitely been developed through studying law. So most of the time, you have to be able to present data. So I've done actual like PowerPoint presentations on specific projects that I've worked on. And I definitely think being able to speak well in that sense and break down these concepts, I can attribute that to studying law, and I can definitely say that it helped. And also stakeholder management as well. When I was doing legal internships, I dealt with so many different stakeholders. I had to work with so many different types of people, and that same skill applies to working in tech, working in data. You're dealing with so many people, whether they're technical, non-technical. So it's definitely helped. But yeah, I would say for the most part, is my presentation that I can say my skills shine the most. And it's definitely due to me studying law and be able to, and being able to, of course, break things down.
That's very, very insightful. So, you've now switched from law, to data, and you're starting out with this boot camp. How did you start off in terms of building your portfolio to be able to show employers and people in the industry that you can actually do the things you say you do?
A portfolio is essentially a collection of projects. So when I said how I would look at a project, that would be one project that I would look at the fashion data set that I looked at, for example, right? That would be one project. And I would have that on GitHub. GitHub, I'd say it's worth watching a YouTube tutorial on how GitHub works. A lot of technical people, when I say um, technical people, I mean uh, software engineers, cybersecurity engineers, they tend to use GitHub as well. So I would say learn GitHub because that can act as your portfolio and you create different repositories within GitHub which can store your projects. So I always say to people have a minimum of 3 projects, keep them ranging and also make sure they actually solve real life problems. Yes, they can be passion projects, but don't go and build a calculator, for example, or just, do a bit of cleaning or create a few pivot tables and think that's the end of your project. Actually have a goal and actually create a projects brief as well, where you're explaining the process of creating your projects, where you're breaking down the steps you've taken, the challenges you faced, and the outcome of your projects as well.
Definitely. Next question would be, are you able to transition from a data analyst role to other analytical roles? For example, a business analyst.
Okay, so actually, a lot of people don't know this, but I've had so many different job titles in the span of 2 years, and I'll explain. So, when I first started off, I was a junior data analyst at a marketing company. Then I became a junior commercial analyst at a media company. Then I became a commercial analyst, so mid-level commercial analyst, before becoming a CRM, so client relationship management analyst. And my new job is client transformation analyst, i.e., basically a data projects manager. So I've had so many different job titles. You don't strictly need to abide by going for a data analyst role. I would say when you're job hunting, look for roles with several different job titles that require the same skills that you have. So instead of searching up data analyst, I would search up SQL, Tableau. I would do a billion kind of search instead. So search by technologies rather than titles. I don't think titles matter as much, especially because like I literally have my tracker on my phone, and I guess people would laugh if they saw the list of companies that I've interviewed for. I've interviewed for 18 companies in the past month, right? Because I was on the job hunt and I was trying to get a new job. And the job titles have ranged. So yeah, let's see, business information analyst, portfolio information analyst, technical business analyst, associate analyst, business development analyst, Salesforce business analyst. So it's really, really ranged. Sales support analyst as well. Like my job titles that I've had have ranged, and the job titles that I interview for range as well. And you realize as you specialize, like I have in specific technologies, you attract very strange job titles. I also had an interview for an innovation analyst, and I was like, what does that even mean? What is an innovation analyst? But I found from reading the job description, it's essentially a data analyst, but they just want someone who is forward thinking, innovative, and can focus more on the data science side of things. So don't get too held up by job titles, is what I'm trying to say. Focus on the skills.
Good, amazing. How do you balance the technical and analytical aspects of your work with creativity?
How do I what? Sorry.
How do you balance the technical and analytical aspects of your work?
With creativity, it
Yeah.
definitely depends on the type of project that I'm working on. So, for example, when you're creating a dashboard, the user interface of the dashboard matters a lot, and the way you lay out a dashboard matters a lot. But that's where you can also be creative. So, I've created dashboards with particular themes, fonts, colors, images. That has kind of enabled me to be creative, especially thinking of how I lay out filters, how I lay out certain features of the dashboard, um, being able to kind of add features such as like when a user clicks on the dashboard, get taken to another dashboard. That's the sort of thing I've been able to do in a creative way, you could say. And then, of course, when I'm working on a project, let's say it's an ad hoc request, I've been creative in how I think of the long-term implications. So I'll give you an example. Early in my career, I was tasked with doing a bit of data modeling within Excel based on financial data. And it was meant to be delivered on a monthly basis. So I was doing that and I was like, wait, hang on a second. This is modeling that I'm doing in Excel. Why can't I just bring this using an API into Salesforce, our CRM system at the time? And why can't I find a way to automate this and create a dashboard out of this so people can just look into it? So that's exactly what I did. I created a dashboard based off of the report that I had in Excel. And my stakeholders were really impressed with me. My manager was really impressed. He was like, oh, wow, I never would have thought to just have this automated. That meant that I didn't have to go and query the data each month. It meant that the data lived there. And because it was connected through an API, it was feeding in live data as well. So that's how I've been able to be creative, you could say.
Thank you so much for that. Another question on the chat is how long did it take you to become professionally technical and proficient?
So again, don't get too held up on getting to a specific point. Just make sure you're able to cover the basic requirements of a role. So of course, I started studying and doing the boot camp during the final year of my law degree. So the boot camp was 13 weeks at the time, so just shy of 3 months. And then I got my first role within a month of completing the boot camp. So in total, it took me 4 months to actually get into tech and 1 month to actually land my role. Of course, this can vary amongst people. I've seen people take 6 to 12 months to break into tech, and that's perfectly normal. So I would say there's no right answer. It really depends on your commitment. It depends on the type of material you're consuming and the types of ways that you're learning as well.
Amazing. So a lot of the people on this call today are in university, are looking for jobs. What advice would you have for someone who's currently doing a non-data degree like yourself to ensure that they're able to stand out in the interview? So like the top three tips you would say for for an interview process.
So to actually land an interview or to actually stand out in the interview.
Stand out in an interview. We can
So
do both. We can do both. Let's start with standing out
okay,
first.
to actually land the interview, I would say go to networking events. Like that is so important. That's what I did, and was a priority for me early on in my career. I went to as many networking events as possible, met a lot of people, got some referrals, funnily enough, just by attending a tech event and just by speaking to one recruiter or somebody who already works at the company. So definitely network is just so important. And then number two, in terms of practical steps you can take aside from networking, it really boils down to you being creative. So on your CV, have a technical project section and briefly describe the projects that you've done so that you stand out when a recruiter actually reads your CV. Like I said, a lot of recruiters for junior data analysts, junior commercial analysts, whatever the case may be, they really, really like people who are inquisitive, who are curious. So kind of demonstrate that curiosity through the projects that you've created. And I guess it's also about documenting your progress. LinkedIn, for people who hate LinkedIn, it's no longer the time to hate LinkedIn. Like LinkedIn has been so amazing for me, despite how I felt about the platform like maybe 2 to 3 years ago. LinkedIn is great for documenting your progress. Write posts, talk about some of the things that you've uncovered, some of the things that you have achieved, some of the projects that you're working on. When recruiters see that you're committed and you're creating and cultivating a personal brand as well, it really does help you more than you think. And then, of course, if you're in um, the interview process, number one, the tell me about yourself question is actually crucial because that sets the tone for the rest of the interview. So if you can smash your answer to that question and you can assert yourself as, again, somebody who's willing to learn and somebody who has done a lot to upskill themselves, like the rest of the interview will be more smooth sailing. Then number two, preparation. Of course, preparation is paramount to everything that I'm saying. Write down the questions that you know are likely to come up in the interview and your answers to those questions as well. So questions that are likely to come up, such as what's the most difficult piece of data that you've worked with? Can you talk me through a project? How do you deal with different stakeholders? Those sort of questions, competency-based questions, make sure you're actually writing out your answers and memorizing them or memorizing keywords that can help you in the interview. And lastly, as cliche as this sounds, just be nice. Like a lot of interviewers really care about your personality. They care about you being likable. So just be likable, be nice. You know, even at the start, you can build a rapport even before the tell me about yourself question. Oh, how was your weekend? What did you do during this? Like, Christmas is coming up. Do you have any plans? Like, just showing all those soft skills are so important in an interview. Like, they look for personality most of the time. Like, your skills matter, but anybody can achieve the same skills that you have. What will really set you apart is being likable and having a good personality.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Um, and yes, so for someone already in the tech space, they have a job. How can they progress? Any tips for progression? I know you talked about the multiple different titles that you've had recently. How can someone do that?
So I guess an action plan is so important at the very beginning of your career. Think about what you want, the goals you have, and if you need to be meeting with your manager on a weekly or fortnightly basis just to go over some of the things that you have. If you can get a mentor. I think that definitely helps to have a mentor to kind of guide you and aid you. But one thing you should be wary of is a company that just doesn't focus too much on your progression, doesn't focus too much on, your development. Like one of the companies did that with me and I just left. Like I don't look for promotions sometimes. Like I get to a point where I'm like, okay, I'm done here, and I just job up because majority of the time when you job up, you get a higher salary, you're in a different industry, you're in a different position. But of course, people's goals are to get promoted, and I'd say an action plan is important, and meeting with your managers and having an understanding of the threshold to get you from, like, for example, junior data analyst to mid-level data analyst to senior data analyst to principal data analyst. Having an understanding of the goals and what you need to take to get there is important. And if you don't have an understanding, it's definitely time for you to have a meeting with your manager.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So we're in the last 10 to 5 minutes of this session. Any last minute tips for applicants, university students, in order to maximize the time and the experiences that they have right now?
If you're already in university, if you're not part of societies, if you're not taking any sort of leadership positions, what are you doing? I only say that because I was treasurer of the African Caribbean Society, and I was also chair of the Feminist Society. And funnily enough, like a lot of my interviews kind of referenced that. So I definitely think it's important to cultivate your soft skills through showing your leadership and extracurricular activities that you have done. Definitely get into contact with your career center as well. My careers advisor was really helpful and really lovely in trying to shape my career path and everything that I was interested in. So yeah, take advantage of those opportunities, and of course attend insight days, open days. Like you're in university, you have the time to do so. Like make it a commitment. Like maybe once a month or once every 2 weeks, try and find a tech event to attend. A lot of companies publish tech events. A lot of networks like Beyond Education publish events. They talk about useful sessions that you can be a part of. So you need to be taking full advantage of that because you need to be able to network with people. You need to be able to meet people and just be able to get to the goal, get to the bag. And the only way you're going to do that effectively is by taking advantage of all these opportunities.
Exactly, exactly. And that brings me to the end of this session, guys. I'm posting on the chat some insight experiences that we have with employers such as HSBC, some new roles we have with BNY, and the entry roles that we have with Octopus Energy, electric vehicles, and Kraken. So, guys, please, 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 like Daniela said, be initiative, be curious, find out what these job descriptions are, any skills you need to build, start building them, and most importantly, apply, 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 apply. And
Yes.
these opportunities are there. We work very, very, very hard to make sure that we get these opportunities for you guys. So please do apply, and please do let us know if you're struggling, you need any help. We're here to help. But any last words, Daniela, before we
Um,
close?
I guess my last words is consistency. Like, stay consistent. Definitely don't listen to any outsiders who are saying the tech space is saturated, who are saying, oh, AI is taking over tech. None of these people work in tech. None of these people have actual brain cells that run, no offense. So, honestly speaking, don't feed into that negative energy. Focus on your path, focus on your goal, and you'll get there sooner than you think. Like, just make sure you're taking advantage of opportunities. Your peers are not in this in this session, for example. Your peers are not going to these networking events. There are people who are lazing around, probably watching, I don't know, Power or something while you're here in this session, and you already have an advantage more than you think. So don't beat yourself up too much if you think you're left behind, especially people who are still at university. Now's the time for you to act and you're already doing well by even being in the session as well. So yeah, I'm rooting for all of you guys. If you have any further questions, definitely like reach out to me, reach out to Demi, especially in regards to like the opportunities at Beyond Education. Definitely take advantage of that, guys. It's so important.
Yes, thank you so much, Daniela, for so much of your knowledge and expertise this evening. We really do appreciate you. And thank you else to everyone who attended the session today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy evenings to come and listen to Daniela speak. But yes, like I said, like me and Daniela have reinforced, there are these opportunities available, so do apply. And we hope to see you next time.
Yes, of course. Thank you guys. Take care,
Thank you
and I
guys
hope you
so
guys have
much.
lovely evenings. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
Do you have any tips for for the commercial analyst role that you guys posted in? Like any specifics?
Are you on the group chat?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Which group
Yeah,
chat?
reach out to me, the Beyond Education group chat. No?
No.
No, all right, cool. I'll reach out to you and we sort that out. Or Daniela, do you have any knowledge about that?
Commercial analysts, they kind of deal with the commercial side of things, like financial, so looking at profits and losses, looking at budget versus actual. So maybe make sure you're leaning into the financial side of things, but as well the commercial side. So sales, look up metrics like customer lifetime value, average sales cycle, revenue probability. Like just get an understanding of these metrics. Even ChatGPT can help you with that, and talk
Hmm.
about how you have experience like in the past looking at these metrics or looking at projects that kind of look at the financial side of things. Like there is definitely still a bit of a difference between a commercial analyst and a data analyst, but I'd say it's more finance heavy, more sales heavy as well. So have an understanding of that. And of course, like if you can lean into some of the values that the company has that are of interest to you, that you genuinely resonate with in your application, and just talk about, like I said, your willingness to learn. I think it matters so much.
Yeah, amazing. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn and we can talk about this further as well. I just put
Yeah,
in my LinkedIn in the chat.
yeah. Feel
But yeah,
free
thank you
to
so
message me
much.
too.
Yeah, amazing. Do that as well.
All right.
Yeah.
Take care, guys.
Thank you
Bye.
guys. Bye.